The valley stretched out before Merek like a shadow-draped cradle, silent and brooding under a bleak sky. As he descended into the Cradle of Silence, he felt an unnatural stillness that seemed to swallow all sound. No birds, no wind, only the faint echo of whispers drifting from the valley's depths. Fenris, his weathered companion, warned him about the valley's dangers, but Merek dismissed them, eager to uncover the mysteries hidden within. Each step forward felt heavier, as if the earth itself resisted him, pressing upon his chest with a relentless dread. Sabine, a fellow seeker with an eye for secrets, lingered close, her gaze wary as she scanned the quiet landscape. Merek could see the tension in her shoulders as she glanced at him, as if sensing the same invisible weight settling over them. Merek was no stranger to silence, yet this felt different, thick, almost tangible, as if silence itself had been woven into the very soil. Shadows twisted across the valley floor, merging and shifting like dark spirits trapped just beneath the surface. Sabine whispered, asking if he felt it too, but Merek could only nod, unwilling to break the silence with his own voice. His heart pounded louder in his chest, an unwelcome reminder of life amidst an otherwise lifeless place. Fenris, unfazed by the eerie calm, muttered something about the old spirits, claiming they were bound to the valley by an ancient pact. Merek forced himself to look ahead, determined to prove Fenris wrong, but the whispers seemed to grow louder, a cacophony of barely audible words brushing against his mind. The valley floor was littered with cracked stones, weathered gravestones and ancient markers etched with runes long forgotten by time. Merek knelt by one of the stones, tracing a finger over its faint carvings, wondering about the stories these graves held. Sabine crouched beside him, her face a mix of fascination and fear as she ran her hand along a nearby headstone. She murmured something about the whispers being the remnants of those who had died here, their voices forever bound to the Cradle of Silence. Merek dismissed her musings as superstition, yet couldn't ignore the cold that seemed to seep up from the stone, reaching through his skin and into his bones. As he stood, he felt a whisper caress his ear so close it was as if someone had spoken just behind him. The whispers began to shift, no longer indistinct, but forming faint words that seemed to call Merek by name. Startled, he glanced around, only to find Fenris and Sabine looking at him with equal confusion. They hadn't heard it, yet the sound was unmistakable to Merek, as clear as his own thoughts. He took a step back, shaken, his breath clouding in the cold, heavy air. Sabine reached for his arm, her face pale as she asked him if he was all right. Merek nodded, though the feeling gnawed at him, that he was being drawn deeper, called by something beyond the grave. He clenched his fists, a sense of unease settling in his stomach as he looked out across the valley, wondering if they had truly ventured too far. As they ventured further into the valley, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to thicken, casting an impenetrable gloom over the ground. The path narrowed, leading them between rows of ancient graves that looked as though they had been abandoned for centuries. Fenris led the way, his lantern casting flickering light over the stones, but even the flame seemed muted, swallowed by the surrounding darkness. Sabine kept close to Merek, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped her own lantern. The whispers grew louder with each step, mingling with their breaths as if they too were alive. Merek's heart raced as he glanced over his shoulder, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon him. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they were no longer alone. The silence deepened as Merek and his companions ventured further into the heart of the valley. The fog grew thicker, swirling in tendrils that seemed almost alive, coiling around their ankles, as if to hold them back. The whispers intensified, shifting from faint murmurs to broken phrases that echoed like forgotten memories. Fenris moved cautiously, his lantern barely piercing the heavy mist, while Sabine clutched her cloak tightly, her eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. Merek's heart pounded as he strained to catch the words, some familiar, some foreign, each a thread to the past lives lost here. For the first time, he sensed the whispers were not random, but deliberate, beckoning him closer, tugging at him like a forgotten promise. Their path narrowed, leading them through an ancient archway covered in moss and strange symbols carved deep into the stone. Sabine paused, her fingers tracing the engravings with a frown. "These symbols, they're marks of protection," she whispered, her voice trembling. Fenris grunted, muttering something about curses rather than protection, as if the valley's magic had twisted its original intent. Merek could feel the weight of the carvings pressing down on him, a sensation that made the air feel thick and oppressive. The whispers around them took on a mocking tone, seeming to laugh at their ignorance. Merek stepped forward, determined but unnerved, sensing that each step bound him more tightly to the valley's secrets. The light from their lanterns flickered as they reached a clearing filled with towering statues, each worn and weathered by countless years. These figures, human-like but grotesque in their twisted forms, seemed to watch them with hollow eyes, their mouths frozen mid-scream. Sabine gasped, her voice a strangled whisper, as she pointed to one of the statues. "Look, it's like they're alive, trapped in stone." Merek reached out to touch the cold, rough surface of a statue, only to feel a pulse, a heartbeat, as though something alive was sealed within. He pulled his hand back in shock, glancing at Fenris and Sabine, who stared at him with equal disbelief. The valley felt alive around them, its secrets buried yet unwilling to stay silent. A distant wail pierced the silence, followed by a chilling gust that swept through the clearing, extinguishing their lanterns. In the sudden darkness, they clung to one another, feeling the air grow colder with each passing moment. Merek could hear the whispers louder than ever, now desperate, pleading, as though they recognized him, called to him by name. Fenris cursed under his breath, his grip tightening around his now useless lantern. Sabine's hand trembled in Merek's as she whispered, "Merek, we shouldn't be here. Something doesn't want us to leave." Merek forced himself to stay calm, though his skin prickled with fear. Whatever haunted this valley had noticed them, and it seemed determined to keep them close. When their lanterns sputtered back to life, the fog had thinned, revealing a narrow path lined with grave markers bearing names from Merek's own family line. Stunned, he approached one of the stones, his own last name etched into the weathered stone. Sabine's eyes widened as she recognized names that echoed stories from her childhood, legends of people who had mysteriously disappeared. Fenris's face twisted with unease as he glanced from marker to marker. The realization crept over them. They were not mere visitors here. They were bound to this place in ways they had never understood. Merek felt his fate closing in around him, as though the valley itself were preparing him for the role he was destined to fulfill. The fog parted as they entered the heart of the valley, revealing an ancient crypt hidden beneath layers of thorny vines and twisted roots. Merek felt his breath catch as he approached, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the weathered stone. The whispers were deafening here, their voices a tumultuous blend of pain and sorrow, all pleading, warning him to turn back. Fenris held up his lantern, its light flickering erratically as though responding to the spirit's presence. Sabine clutched Merek's arm, her eyes wide with terror as she whispered, "They're calling you, Merek. Only you." He forced himself to ignore the fear pooling in his stomach, knowing that whatever lay within the crypt held the answer to his connection to the valley. With a heavy breath, Merek pushed open the stone door, and an icy gust swept over them, extinguishing their lanterns once again. Darkness engulfed them, but the whispers continued, now stronger and clearer, as if they had entered a realm where the dead roamed freely. The walls seemed to shift, casting shadows that twisted into ghostly forms, watching them with hollow eyes. Merek took a step forward, his voice breaking the silence as he demanded answers from the unseen forces. His voice echoed, and for a moment the whispers stopped, replaced by a deep, resonant voice. It spoke his name, filling the crypt with a chilling authority. Fenris and Sabine cowered, but Merek held his ground, compelled by something beyond fear, a need to understand the truth. The voice revealed a haunting truth. Every whisper, every soul bound to the valley, was a former guardian who had succumbed to the role of Gravekeeper. Merek felt his blood run cold as the realization sank in. Each name etched into the gravestones outside had once been someone like him, drawn to the valley only to be claimed by it. Sabine's eyes brimmed with horror as she backed away, her steps faltering as the voice continued to explain that Merek had been chosen, his bloodline bound to this ancient duty. Fenris whispered to Merek, urging him to leave, but Merek shook his head, understanding that he could no longer escape the valley's grasp. The valley's darkness reached out to him, binding him with invisible chains of duty and despair. Desperate, Sabine grabbed Merek's arm, pulling him toward the exit, but a shadowy figure appeared, blocking their path. The figure was a spectral apparition of a previous Gravekeeper, its face twisted in eternal sorrow, eyes hollow and empty, but its presence exuded an overwhelming power. Merek froze, meeting the spirit's gaze, feeling a strange kinship with the apparition, as if he was staring at his own future. The spirit raised a hand, pointing toward the crypt's entrance, silently commanding Merek to stay and accept his fate. Sabine screamed, urging him to resist, while Fenris brandished his lantern in a futile attempt to ward off the spirit. Merek, torn between duty and his friend's pleas, found himself rooted to the spot, the valley's pull more powerful than his desire to leave. The crypt pulsed with energy as Merek made his choice, feeling the valley's ancient power seep into his veins. The whispers became a chorus, welcoming him as the next Gravekeeper, their voices merging into a single entity that bound itself to Merek. Sabine's desperate cries faded, and Fenris's form blurred as Merek's world transformed, the valley becoming his sanctuary and prison all at once. He could see the spirits of past Gravekeepers lining the walls, their faces solemn, as they watched him take his place among them. With a final resigned breath, Merek embraced his fate, becoming one with the valley and its chilling legacy. Merek's vision blurred as the valley's energy pulsed through him, each heartbeat anchoring him deeper into the earth. He could feel the whispers more acutely now, each one a voice in his mind, echoing the fears, regrets, and last moments of past Gravekeepers. Fenris and Sabine watched in silent horror as Merek's form seemed to waver, shadowed tendrils creeping up from the ground and binding to him. Merek looked at his hands, seeing faint, spectral lines etching themselves onto his skin, marks of the valley's claim. Fenris tried to reach out, but a force seemed to repel him, keeping him from touching Merek. Sabine's eyes glistened with helplessness as she whispered his name, but Merek's mind was elsewhere, drawn into the endless, sorrowful depths of the Cradle of Silence. Sabine pleaded with Merek to resist, but the valley's power had already woven itself into his very being. He could feel the presence of past Gravekeepers guiding him, each one passing down their memories and warnings, as if entrusting him with their legacy. Shadows circled around him, and he could hear fragments of their lives, loves lost, sacrifices made, and the overwhelming burden of watching over the valley's secrets. Sabine's voice grew distant, her words swallowed by the murmurs of those who had walked this path before him. Merek's face hardened, his will slowly surrendering to the inevitable, his gaze hollow and resigned. Fenris, ever the realist, gripped his lantern tightly, as if preparing himself to leave Merek behind, recognizing that the friend he knew was gone. Merek's transformation became visible to all as the valley's spectral energy enveloped him, binding him to the earth and shadows. The ground beneath him darkened, forming intricate patterns of roots and ghostly tendrils that twisted around his legs, linking him to the graves scattered across the valley. Sabine's cries echoed in the silence, but Merek barely heard them, his consciousness sinking deeper into the role he was destined to fulfill. He felt the sorrow and duty of each spirit merging with his own thoughts, their voices now his, guiding him on how to protect the valley from those who might intrude upon its secrets. His senses sharpened, allowing him to feel every grave, every shadowed corner of the Cradle of Silence. The valley was no longer just a place, it was part of him. The shadows that once hid in the valley now obeyed Merek, moving at his command, responding to his thoughts. He looked down at Sabine and Fenris, feeling an immense distance between them, as though he had ascended to a different plane. Sabine reached out, tears streaming down her face, begging him to come back, to fight the valley's hold. But Merek knew it was too late. He was the valley's keeper now, bound by the same curse that had claimed so many before him. The sorrow in his heart was mixed with a strange peace, as if finally accepting his fate brought a sense of purpose. Fenris took a step back, realizing there was no saving Merek, and a look of grief crossed his face as he turned away, guiding Sabine with him. As Fenris and Sabine made their way out of the valley, Merek stood alone, surrounded by the silent graves that he was now bound to protect. He could feel the weight of his new role settling upon him, heavy yet unavoidable, like a mantle woven from shadow and sorrow. The valley's whispers quieted, recognizing him as their keeper, and the shadows around him grew calm, almost welcoming. Merek felt his last ties to his past life dissolve, his memories fading into the endless echoes of those who came before him. He looked out across the Cradle of Silence, feeling a strange kinship with the spirits and the land he was now forever bound to guard. The valley accepted him, and in the eerie calm that followed, he knew he was home. As the night settled over the valley, an eerie calm descended, as if the cradle itself exhaled in relief. Merek stood alone among the graves, now silent. Their whispers faded into a quiet acceptance of their new guardian. The weight of his role pressed down on him, yet he felt an unexpected peace, his mind merging with the spirits bound to this place. He looked across the valley, now seeing it as both sanctuary and prison, his connection to it deeper than life itself. The shadows that once loomed menacingly now swirled around him, a gentle reminder that he was no longer Merek, but the valley's keeper, a custodian of secrets as old as time. Fenris and Sabine had long departed, their footsteps fading into the distance, yet Merek felt no urge to follow. He knew they had tried to save him, but his fate had been sealed the moment he entered the cradle. A sense of timelessness settled over him, memories of his past life slipping away like fragments of a dream. He no longer yearned for freedom or companionship, only to fulfill his duty, to protect the valley from those who would disturb its haunted peace. The faces of past gravekeepers appeared in his mind, each one silently guiding him, teaching him the rites and rules he would now uphold. Merek's heart, though heavy, beat with a purpose as profound as it was bleak. Merek walked among the graves, feeling their stories seep into him, each one a fragment of a life once lived. As he passed each marker, the memories of those laid to rest within rose to greet him, sharing their secrets, regrets, and unfulfilled desires. He understood now that his role was not just to guard the valley, but to remember each soul, to carry their stories so they would not be lost to time. The cradle had become his world, its shadows his only companions, and he found solace in the knowledge that he was now part of something greater, something eternal. He paused by a gravestone, its carvings faded, and placed a hand on it, feeling a kinship with the spirit within, as though they had always been connected. As dawn approached, the valley seemed to come alive, the mist shifting and swirling as if acknowledging its new keeper. The once oppressive silence felt warm and inviting, a sign that the valley had accepted him as its own. Merek closed his eyes, feeling his senses extend beyond his body, touching every shadowed corner, every forgotten grave, binding him to this place more deeply than he had ever known. His own heartbeat faded, replaced by the soft pulse of the valley itself, a rhythm as old as the earth. The valley and Merek were one, each dependent on the other, and as the last remnants of his old self faded away, he welcomed the peace of oblivion. In the Cradle of Silence, time ceased to matter, and Merek became a mere shadow among the graves, his form blending with the mist. His spirit echoed within the valley, a soft whisper among countless others, destined to guide those who might come after him. The shadows moved in gentle acknowledgement of their new gravekeeper, and the valley settled into a profound stillness. Merek's name joined the chorus of whispers, a faint echo bound to the land for all eternity. And so, the valley remained untouched, its guardian forever vigilant, watching over the secrets of the dead as the Cradle of Silence claimed yet another soul.